Okay, so reacting and responding, you might think these aren't they the same thing? Well, we're going to learn a little bit today about how they are not necessarily the same thing. And of course, last week, Pete talked about drama and uncertainty. So, what happens in the brain chemistry, when you face situations of reward, because we want to maximize reward and we move towards reward, when there's danger or threat and we want to run away from threat, and what's happening in the brain. And so then he went a bit deeper into uncertainty and versus certainty. Certainty is considered a reward. Certainty, knowing what's going to happen, being in control. The brain really, really likes when that is happening. The brain does not like uncertainty. The brain does not like change. That is a threat, because uncertainty is like, well, something good could happen, something not so good can happen. So Pete took us through, what's going on chemically and in different parts of the brain. And so, I talked about how do we manage that. And he talked about the difference a little bit between reacting and responding. And if you've been a regular on Pete's sessions and my sessions, you know that this has come up a few times. We have talked about those. And so today we're going to talk a little bit more about reacting and responding. And basically, reacting is when something happens, and reacting is that instantaneous, the brain just makes you do something that in hindsight you might think, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Quite often it's an action, a behavior, something you say that is not necessarily the most productive. And so you can see here, it's the steam coming out of the ears, you want to strangle someone, you're tearing your hair out. And if you're doing it in the privacy of your own home, maybe that's okay. It's when you do it around other people that it can have a negative impact on other people. And so the opposite side of that is responding. So responding, and we're going to dig into how do you respond versus react today. Responding is when you take that nanosecond, the half second, whatever, to think, what is the appropriate way for me to behave in this situation? And so sometimes it's being quiet. Just keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything. Don't do anything. Sometimes it's having a private conversation later with someone. Sometimes it's focusing. How do I focus on the positive that's happening here? And we'll deal with the negative stuff later. So responding is really coming up with a more appropriate, more productive way to behave in a situation. So we are going to launch a poll. Can everyone see the poll?
You can see a slide.
Okay, so it's relaunch poll. There we go. Okay, it wasn't.
Is it working?
Because you had tested it earlier, Kelly.
That's probably
I have
why.
to relaunch and because it wasn't giving me a launch option. All right. So, how often do you react in a non-productive way to situations at work? Generally, non-productive is a negative reaction. Sometimes an excessively positive reaction can also be non-productive or could be inappropriate. At least once a day, a few times per week, a few times per month, a few times per year, or never. I always act appropriately. So just pick your response and then we will share. All right. I think we have...
That's all of them then.
I was going to say, yeah, we have 15 participants. So yeah, okay. Yeah. All right. So we have 8%, at least once a day, someone who is, in hindsight thinking, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. And sometimes it can be a small negative response or small inappropriate, and sometimes they can be big blow-ups. 1% a few times per week. About half of the people are saying a few times per month. So not that often, right? But still happening often enough that, they can remember it's happening a few times per year. And no one has said that they never respond or react in a non-productive way. So, it's encouraging that the bulk of the selections, the responses, are at the less frequent end of the scale rather than the more frequent end of the scale. But you can see that everybody at some time is in a situation where they really think afterwards, ooh, probably shouldn't have said that, probably shouldn't have done that, and sometimes that reaction requires you to go back and you have to fix something, right? So you have to go back and apologize or have a conversation, mend bridges, work to fix relationships. So let's we're going to talk more about how to do that. Raymond, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question in terms
Mhm.
of when we're talking about reaction, would you count as like no reaction also potentially negative reaction when in the case like you don't know how to react and you don't know how to respond at all?
That's a really interesting question. Yeah, I would say yes, if you don't know the appropriate response, that no reaction at all could be considered inappropriate. Someone shares some news, so, hey, I'm pregnant, and you're like, I don't know if you're happy or not happy to be pregnant. I don't know the right response. Right? And the person's desperately waiting for you to jump up and down and congratulate them, and you don't. That could be an inappropriate, like in hindsight, that could be inappropriate. Or conversely, they're going, oh my goodness, my life has ended. And, and they're expecting sympathy or something, and you don't give that. So
That's
I think it could be, but it's probably better than taking a risk, like taking a moment to think about what might be the appropriate response is probably better than jumping to a conclusion. Pete?
No, I was just saying that the way it was described, it was similar to an impasse, which we talked about a couple of months ago.
Mm-hmm.
But then the golden bit that you said in your last sentences was, what was the person expecting you to? How was the person expecting you to react? And that just lends itself beautifully into what you and I are going to talk to in March.
Exactly. Thank you, Pete, for seeding the curiosity. And everyone's going to, now they can't miss March because it's like, oh, we get the answer to that question. We get more. But so Ray, that is a really good question. And I think it does tie to, if you're not sure, in order to come up with an appropriate response as opposed to a reaction that may be inappropriate, it is taking, I'll be talking a bit more about this, it is taking that moment to think and read the signals. Is she smiling because she's pregnant, or is she about to cry because she's pregnant? And what do I say? And obviously that's not a work situation, although it might happen to someone at work. But okay, so a little bit of an exercise. This is where, if anyone is willing to share, can you recall a time when you reacted and there was inappropriate negative impact on the situation rather than responded appropriately? And what could you have done differently? This is when we learn from each other.
I can share.
Thank you.
What could I have done differently? Take the time to read twice an email.
Oh,
I read an email, I skipped a sentence, which changed the overall
Context.
meaning of the email. So I just replied, no, this is not how you do certain things. And they said, well, no, but I invite you to read again the message. So I just made a fool of myself in that situation.
Fabio, that is, thank you for sharing that, because when it comes to email, the temptation is always, we feel we've been trained by the technology, must respond right away, must respond right away. And the wonderful thing with email versus an in-person conversation is you can actually take a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. You can think about your response. You can write a draft, but not send it.
Yeah.
That's what Lori just put in save.
Oh,
So-
okay. I was
Yeah.
just going to check the
So
chat. Okay.
because of that, I actually set up my Outlook to send the email 15 seconds after I click send.
Good.
Which also helps me remember, oh, did I attach the attachment that I mentioned in the email itself?
Yeah, that is that's a really good, I think most email systems allow you to do that, so that, because like I'm on G Suite and it'll be message sent, click here to undo, right? And I have 30 seconds, because then it's like, oh, hang on, didn't mean for that to go.
Yeah.
So that's a wonderful thing when you can do that, and it's like, okay, bring it back, if save it to draft, or if you've accidentally sent, if you've got a few seconds to pull it back before it goes into the ether. That can really help you to make sure you have responded correctly. And sometimes, people are not everyone's an amazing communicator or an amazing writer of emails. And so sometimes you do have to read something 3 or 4 times before you realize what they're saying. And I've had that situation where I've read an email and I'm like, what on earth? What are they thinking? And then I read it a few more times and like, oh no, they are saying what I would like them to say. It just didn't, strike me that way. And then I can go respond with, oh, that's great, rather than some version of, what were you thinking, right? Thank you, Fabio, for sharing that. Anyone else want to share something? Lori, yes, thanks.
Okay, so I think a trigger of mine, and I have to watch it, is if someone else is reacting. Because then it escalates if you react to their reacting.
Yep.
So if somebody is spinning out, sometimes it's hard. I find it sometimes hard to pause and respond, because part of it feels, and I guess it's taking it of me, part of it feels like I'm practicing restraint in the face of somebody who's not. Is that fair? But it just escalates. So it's I'm trying to think of an example, but if somebody, one of the best can be customer service. A customer comes in, which I've had a customer comes in and they're screaming at you.
Yeah.
And then you have to somehow find your calm and respond to that, so it de-escalates rather than escalates. And sometimes it's take a break.
Yeah.
Like, to me, that's something, but it's not like, I guess one of the bad reactions is like then getting down on, like, attacking, like making a negative comment about the person. Like, and then they just escalate more.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting point, because I think in those circumstances, the only thing you really can do is absorb the attack, because to the session that we ran earlier this month, that individual who's angry and out of control, their limbic system is on absolute maximum thermometer. The amygdala's gone at that point, blown completely. But what that means is they are totally incapable of thinking logically.
Yeah.
Because they've taken all the energy from the prefrontal cortex, just getting technical for a second, which means that if you stay calm, there's no way you can lose that argument. There's no way you can lose that interaction if you're going to make it a win or a loss scenario. All you have to do is just wait for them to run out of steam.
And so yeah, run out of steam, let them know they've been heard. It may or may not be appropriate to apologize, but there are a bunch of things that you can do. And Pete, let's get them interested. You may be hearing more about some of these situations in the future. Julie, you have your hand up. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to just add sort of back to the email thing as well. I learned a long time ago, when I was much younger and a little less experienced in life, that, those knee-jerk responses never work in your favor. So I find now, and I don't know if it's the appropriate response, but when somebody sends me a snarky email or is rude or, I just don't respond. I just say, I don't do anything. And often I think sometimes it can backfire and they feel dismissed, but often what happens is they have to look at what they've written because they're not getting a response. And often they come crawling over, sorry, my email sounded a bit, and then you can have a conversation. Or I'll respond and say, why don't we meet for a coffee and discuss? Like, I take it completely off email, and I will say, because as soon as you get somebody face to face, or even on a Zoom call, like, it disarms them completely. So people aren't going to rant at you to your face usually as much as they will in an email. So that's my response to emails now, is to not respond and just let them simmer. And it's kind of almost a little bit like, it makes me feel kind of like, I gotcha, because you're not baiting me on this one. You're not going to get me to grab the hook. I'm just going to sit back and let you keep casting and see what happens. But might not always be the right response either.
and so it's sometimes because people will push your buttons, right?
Yes.
And by not responding, or to Lori's point about, responding in a way to try to diffuse the energy and the negativity of the situation, you're taking the higher ground. You're being the bigger person, right? And behaving in the more appropriate manner, which can help to diffuse. And having an argument over email, I think no one is ever going to win, right?
No,
like,
it's terrible.
You need to shift it to a discussion where you can have a discussion in person, because then you also get, if you've been on any of my communication talks for Tech Connects, only 7% of a message is communicated through words. The rest is through body language, tone of voice, energy level. Are they waving their arms or not? And you lose so much of that in email. And quite often with words, if someone had said the same words, they would have said it in a way that wouldn't have been as snarky. And you would have said, oh, they don't really mean to be snarky. But when all you see are the words in an email, it's like, oh, they're being snarky.
And it also depends on how you're feeling when you read it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. If you're already, you've already had, you spilt your coffee and the dog chewed your slippers or whatever, you're more likely to see that in a snarky way. And so having that personal touch of at least a Zoom call or, meeting in person, you start to see there's so much more than just words on paper. And really get the message. Yeah.
The other thing that I do is when I read any email, whether it's a nasty one or a nice one, I always take a second to pause and say, what was the intent?
Yeah.
What was the intent by the person who sent this? Because yes, you're right. Sometimes the intent is naughty. They're trying to get me worked up, or they're trying to make a point, but they're not making it in a positive way. But I think taking that time to just ask the question, was this sent in good faith? What was the intent here? Are there different interpretations? That comes down to the reappraisal that we talked about before, but it forces you to respond rather than react, because you can't react if you're taking the time to ask the question, what was the agenda here? What was the intent?
Yeah, because the person sending the email has probably also been in the situation where they're rushed. They just have to get the email. It's like, oh, I've got to get this note out to Julie. And they're not thinking, they're not taking the time to craft an appropriate email, right? Or a carefully worded email. And they just bang something off. And, they may or may not intend to push your buttons, right? We talked about that. But, a lot of the time, to Pete's point, what's the intent? They probably didn't mean it to sound snarky. They were just trying, like, I need you to do this. I need you to know this, whatever it is. And so it can can definitely come across in a way that was not intended. Similarly with text, all of those non-face-to-face communication methods. Sherry, yes.
One thing that from emails, because I do understand, yes, we quickly go through them, and my video's not coming up. There we go. Is that what I tend to do is scroll down and read the whole email. So last week I had an example where a lady totally blamed us for something. And so I replied to her, but then I also replied to the earlier email and said, this is not our policy. It's the bank policy. It has nothing to do with us. So she phoned me right after that meeting and said, oh my God, you read my email. And I said, well, yes. I said, and I'll assume responsibility if it was us. But no. If it wasn't, you're going to get it back. But she didn't expect me to scroll down and read where the chain was. What were they trying to resolve? I'm trying to help you. And then I went back and said, no, it wasn't us. This is bank policy we have to follow. And her tune changed after that. And we got what we needed the next day.
And that's a really good point, Sherry. Thank you. So, read it all, right? Read everything. Seek to understand what's going on. And sometimes people will blame you for something when it's actually someone else's fault, or it might be the sender's quote unquote fault, right? They might have made a mistake or missed something. So that's where you then need to be careful about your response so that, it's like there are times when I've wanted to, it's like, yeah, but I told you that, you didn't read my email, and I'm, but I don't say it that way, right? It's like, recall, as we discussed, or, finding a way without blaming them and making them feel bad, but to point out what's going on. And, Sherry, it's like, it's not us, it's the bank, right?
And help for the future.
Well,
right?
exactly.
You can only learn from it, and then it helps for the next
Yep.
time, so they understand what we need.
Right. Exactly. And just, so everyone's on the same playing field. So awesome. All right. So let's reacting and responding. So this is all part of emotional intelligence, also known as EQ. And emotional intelligence is being able to recognize, understand, and manage our own emotions and motivations. So there's an internal component and there's an external component, recognizing, understanding, and influencing the emotions of others. So, it's like, I'm upset, whatever the reason is, I'm upset. I understand I'm upset. I know I'm thinking about how do I react given that I'm upset? Thinking about why am I upset? What do I want to do about it? But then also saying, oh, Julie's also upset. Well, is Julie upset for the same reason I'm upset, or for a different reason? And how do we understand that? And oh, Kelly's upset, and Lori's upset, and Stan's upset. Now, I'm realizing everyone's upset. Okay, what's going on here? What can I do? How can I influence what's happening in the room? Maybe I say, hey, you know what? I think there's something going on here. Maybe we all just need to take a breath, deep breath, pause for a minute, and then take turns sharing our concerns. So one thing is, to control how I'm feeling. Another is to help control the emotions that are spinning in the room. And Danielle shares, speaking of responding, I have to jump into a customer situation. Well, good luck with that, Danielle. You can listen to the recording. All right.
She does also say she's glad that she's not alone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, we are, none of us are alone in these things. And yeah, Danielle's director of support services. So she's dealing with this stuff all the time. So reacting and responding in terms of emotional intelligence, there are, of the 5 pieces of emotional intelligence, this really comes into the self-management or regulation, controlling or redirecting disruptive impulses and moods, and the propensity to suspend judgment and think before acting. And that's an important thing. It's like suspend judgment about what is the other person thinking. So to Pete's point, what was the intent of the email? Don't just assume they meant to be snarky and mean to me, but maybe they were rushed, maybe they didn't understand, maybe they misunderstood, if they had misunderstood something, then we need to correct that misunderstanding and we can move forward, and really thinking before acting. And we talked back in October about self-awareness and self-management. You can't manage your emotions and reactions unless you're aware of them. So the first step is understanding, how am I feeling right now? And then the social regulation is influencing the emotions in the room, building relationships, building networks, and managing what's happening in the moment. And so, why is this important? And Lori, I think you hit the nail on the head. You mentioned this about how you can mirror the emotion. If someone else is getting upset, you are more likely to get upset. And there's a lot of research about this. And there's some relatively new research from the University of California. That shows that you will experience the emotions that you see others expressing. If someone shows anger, you are likely to get angry, even if you actually have no reason to get angry. You may not feel it as intensely as they do, but you will feel it. A quarter of people had higher levels of the stress hormone when they saw someone exhibiting signs of stress, whether they knew the person or not. If you see someone exhibiting classic signs of stress, you will tend to feel more stressful. And it was something like 40% of people had increased stress hormone when it was the romantic partner in their life who were exhibiting stress. And then it was a bit lower percent if it was someone that you didn't know. But even a total stranger on the street, they look like they're in stress, you're going to be stressed. Mm-hmm. So when you're in a meeting and every person in the meeting's getting stressed because something's happened, even if you're trying to be calm, your brain is not going to let you be calm. So you have to get control, because what happens is you get that huge spiral of negative, angry emotions, and everyone feeds off everyone else. So to Lori's point, if you are then able to project a calmer demeanor, if a number of people talk to it, it's like lowering the energy level to, as Pete said, with customer service. You have to just let them get it out, but don't react negatively. That can move you to a more positive place. And
you
so
know what though?
Yeah,
Jane, some of it, and you talk about the calmness and things. I also think there are times that your reaction is intentional, and you get to the point where, okay, maybe you do need to lose it a little bit. And what I look at that is, okay, maybe it could be somebody you're working with, it could be your kids, it could be whatever. You've asked them to do something over and over again, and they're always doing the exact same thing. Or they're kind of careless with the things that they do. And sometimes it just puts you in a bad light. And you get to the point where, I've been kind. I have been trying to help you. I have been patient. And sometimes it's like, I've had enough. You're an idiot. And you need to, you need to do this, right? So I think sometimes your reaction does become intentional, even though you're maybe a little more heated.
Yes, you're right, Kelly. There are times when you do need to increase the temperature a little bit, because with self-awareness, it's, what is your emotional temperature, right? There may be times when it's appropriate to increase a bit. I would recommend you may not call them an idiot to their face. I'm just saying you might want to think about your choice of words there, and I know you know that. You're just you're saying that those are the inside the head words, right? But sometimes, it's kind of like laying down the law, or just really you need to get people to listen. You need to increase, and then it's kind of like, whoa, mom's upset. I guess we should listen to mom, right? A situation years and years ago, I was. We were doing some product development in Italy with a company that Procter & Gamble had purchased in Italy, and the culture in Italy is very much a culture where you're in meetings and you argue, and when you argue, you really argue, right? You might scream and yell, and then you go out and you have an espresso or a glass of wine, and you're best friends, right? And just that's the way it is. So I was at the time, the lowest person organizationally. There had been a meeting that was me, my boss's boss. An agreement had been reached that the people that we were partnering with would do something. My boss and my boss's boss, they had to go to Germany for another meeting. I was left in Italy to make sure everything happened. And as soon as the two people above me had left, that they changed their minds. They started doing something differently. And I was using all my, all the techniques I had. And basically what I had to do was I had to yell. And I don't yell particularly often, but it was like, Giovanni, you told Dennis and Mitch that you were going to do this, and that was the agreement, and blah, 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 blah. And he was just like, oh. He thought he could work around me, and he was somehow separately going to deal with the fact that he violated the agreement. And he was like, oh, okay. And then he clapped me on the back and said, Jane, that was awesome. You're great. That was good. And I'm like, okay. I was feeling horrible. But it was culturally appropriate for me to do that. And we had known each other. Oh yeah, and Fabio says 100% true. And it's not just Italians. There are many cultures.
Oh no, that was the biggest culture shock for me. Participating in a meeting here in North America, coming from Italy, is different, definitely different.
And I mean, there's another whole. We could run a year's worth of sessions just on some of those cultural differences, right? But it comes down to what is appropriate in the situation. When I was in Italy, it was appropriate for me to behave in a way that would be completely inappropriate in North America. So yeah, thank you, Fabio, for confirming that. So, and it is mirroring. Yeah, to Lori's point in the chat, it is mirroring and picking up on the cues. So understanding what you are feeling. Pete mentioned this a minute ago earlier as well. The amygdala, when you start to feel negative emotions, it hijacks your brain. It takes over. Emotions can drive everything. It limits your ability to make decisions, to function appropriately. If you're in a heated argument with sometimes, it's like your brain shuts down. You cannot process thought because of what's happening in your brain. And it can take a lot of positive stuff happening and a lot of time before you get control. So how do you learn to respond appropriately versus reacting? The first thing is to acknowledge that your reactions are within your control. You can learn how to do this. There's going to be good people and stuff happening and some not so good people and stuff happening, things outside your control. Choosing to be the little yellow ball happy face as opposed to the sad faces or the angry faces is something that you can control. And Pete talked last time about reaching a state of equanimity, so mental calmness and composure, and someone said that it's probably impossible to do that all the time, but learning to be able to have a state of equanimity a little bit more often can be definitely helpful. And yes, Ray, you have your hand up. Yep.
So I just want to add something. I saw on the other slide, like high emotions. We've been talking about negative emotions mostly, right? But you had joy on there as well. And one of the things I have to deal with my team sometimes is when we're dealing with clients, they want to please the clients, right? So they react to any requests that they make. Right. And so they make the client happy because they're agreeing to something, right? But then has a negative impact on the team when they bring it back to the team.
Yes. And so there's a teaching moment there. There's some teaching and training in terms of with the team in terms of what decision capacity, decision space do they have in terms of what they can and cannot say yes to, because it can cause your company, then you're like, okay, we've committed this. And I think many companies have this challenge. The salesperson is out there selling. They're rewarded for selling. They want to make the customer happy. It's sell, say yes, 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 we can do that, we can do that, we can do that. And then they come back and you're like, well, that's actually physically impossible. And who has to, who goes back to the customer to explain, oh, I'm sorry, we can't actually do that for you. So helping them understand very clearly what they can and cannot say yes to, and helping them to learn ways to say, basically it's, let me get back to you on that. Let me talk to my manager. Let me, I'd love to help you with that. I need to figure out what the scope and the implication is of meeting that request, and help them learn how to say those things to the customer so that they're not saying no quite yet. Let them go back, because some of the things it might be a yes, but then if it is a no, how can they go back to say no appropriately? And so that's a thing in their training where it's helping them understand how to say no in a way that everyone's happy, which is a difficult skill to learn, I know. So, because that's, it can get you in a tight spot when that happens. So Pete Lott talked last time about, when you're in a situation, you can express your emotions. That's not always a good thing. You can suppress them. He talked about the stiff upper lip, and that's not always a good thing either. So cognitive change, labeling, one thing you can do is labeling. So that's linked to the self-awareness. Just merely saying, I am happy, I am unhappy, I am upset, can help you then process and deal with the emotion, and then can help you reinterpret what's going on and behave in a different way. Some other things to help you respond versus react, managing your stress level. We all know this, get enough exercise, get enough sleep, practice mindfulness. When, if you've had 3 hours sleep, you're much more likely to react negatively versus if you've had 7 or 8 hours sleep. If you have just gone for a run and you've got endorphins running through your body and someone sends you a snarky email, you're much more likely to go, oh, they're having a bad day, right? And react in a more, respond in a more appropriate way. So there are things you can do, lifestyle things, and we all know there are so many reasons to do these things, right? And mindfulness, not just do I meditate during the day, but mindfulness in the moment when something happens, being mindful of how you're reacting and taking a moment to go, okay, deep breath, catch my breath. Okay, just the fact of getting more oxygen in your lungs and into your bloodstream can help lower your stress level. Thinking about situations when you had reacted in a way that in hindsight you're going, ooh, I wish I hadn't said that. I wish I'd done something differently. Looking back and saying, okay, what made me react that way? Why did I do that? Why did I say that? How could I have reacted differently? Will help you in the future when you face similar situations to react in a more appropriate way, respond in a more appropriate way. Ask, is this the worst thing that can happen? Okay, I got a snarky email or someone said something really mean. Is that the worst thing that can happen? Count to 10 backwards, do something, tie up the part of your brain that is making you feel upset, angry, stressed out, and just put a pause on things and think for a moment. It's taking that breath. You might focus on a physical sensation for a moment, and this can be a few seconds, right? You can say, okay, I hear birds? Oh yeah, okay. Birds are calming. Okay, now I'm in a better place to think about how to respond to what's happened. Just that big inhale and big exhale. Pete's talked some number of months ago about mindfulness and what he calls PACE, pay attention to what's going on. Acknowledge your assumptions. I'm assuming the person meant to be snarky. Ooh, what's their intent? Maybe they did not. Understand your perspective, that you're seeing things through your lens, not necessarily their lens. Seek different perspectives, what their lens might be, and examine your options and make a decision. So being mindful, the space of mind in which we consider various options and then choose the most appropriate ones. We choose to respond versus react. And with practice, this can happen pretty quickly. You can learn to respond better over time. Practice the art of silence. It's like, oh, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. Just bite my tongue for another few more seconds. Or think about, you're on the phone and you're listening, but you've got the receiver flipped up, old-fashioned phone handle, but you have the part you talk into flipped up, so you can't talk yet. Let them state their point. And there are many possibilities of ways you can react. So choose the battles you'll fight. Is this the end of the world? Is this something worth damaging a relationship over? If I'm going to share what I'm feeling, if I'm going to express that I'm upset or angry, is it helpful or hurtful to share? Is it going to help me achieve my goals? Is it going to help the relationship? Or is it going to get in the way of that in both the short and the long term? If you choose to share, so if your response is, yes, I'm going to tell them I'm angry, how do you do that constructively? Do you do it in the moment? Do you do it later, privately? Do you yell at them? Oh, sometimes, Fabio, sometimes, yeah, yelling is the way to make it work. To get into Kelly's point, sometimes you have to, yell at your kids, whatever, get attention. But quite often it can be lowering your tone of voice. And when you lower and speak at a more quietly, people, they have to pause and start to listen. And that can diffuse all of the energy in the room. I will have to remember I'm here today to cross the swamp, not to fight all the alligators. So you may just jump over the alligators. You may choose to ignore the negativity that's happening around you. And so practicing empathy, a lot of this ties up in empathy. Will your reaction help or hurt the person? How might they feel if you say what you're going to say? What's that going to do to them? How would you feel if someone said that thing to you? So put yourself in their shoes. They may not have put themselves in your shoes. You have to remember that they may not be doing any of the things we're talking about today. But what can you do to think about where they're coming from, what their perspective is, and what is their intent, to Pete's point earlier? Excuse me. And this comes from the careful observation. So look at their body language, their tone of voice. And in an email, you don't have that. You just have the word. So you have to try and figure it out, giving them the benefit of the doubt. When it's a person-to-person thing, maintaining eye contact in most cultures shows respect and undivided attention. In some cultures, eye contact is seen as confrontational and disrespectful, and you want to break eye contact. So you want to understand what's appropriate in the culture that you're operating in. Generally in North America, eye contact is appropriate because it shows I'm listening to you. I want to hear what you have to say, and I'm going to pay attention. And I'm going to respect what you're saying. I may not agree with it, but I'm going to respect what you're saying, and then we can move forward and let's try to have a fruitful discussion. And remember to practice empathy toward yourself if you don't get it right, because you won't always get it right, right? So practice empathy towards yourself. It's like, okay, yeah, I really messed up there. You might go back and apologize. You might need to take some steps to repair what's going on. Lori, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say is to the eye contact thing. That's what I spent the O's like 10 years in Ireland and the O's, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some of it comes from the 700 years of occupation, but they actually don't like eye contact.
Yeah.
But it's a negative thing, and people would come up to me and they'd be saying something and they kind of like stand beside you looking somewhere else and they're talking, and if you look at them with their eyes, it's challenging. Like they find it challenging. And it was really because I'm an eye contact from here. It was really something that I had to learn to not do, to when it was a difficult conversation. It was just really weird for me. But that's an example of, you were saying culturally, eye contact can be not be a problem,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and share.
Well, thank you. And because it's important when you are moving into a new culture, it is important to try to quickly figure some of those things out. And you might need like a a cultural advisor, right? Someone who it's like, can you just tell me like how things work here, right? Because I have certain assumptions about appropriate ways to behave based on, where I grew up, where I live, the culture I was in, and they may not be the same here. So can you help me? So understanding things like eye contact, physical space that you give someone is also excuse me, is also important. Do you touch someone or not? Can you pat them on the back or not? Right? Tap them on the shoulder or not? And within a culture, you will also find, a variation where even if it's a culture where if being close physical space is accepted and expected, there will be some people who will want a little more space. So it comes back again to watch what's going on around you, mirroring the behaviors you see, and don't assume that the way you behave where you came from is what's appropriate to behave where you are now. And when you look at, you know, Canada has a lot of different cultures. I'm looking through, as I look through the participants here, we have a mix of a lot of people born here, a lot of people not born here in Canada, right? And even if they were born here, their parents may not have been. They're bringing different cultures. And so you really, there's an individuality to it as well, that takes time. I met someone at a networking event last week. It was an in-person event. I literally had a 30-second conversation with her. And as we were saying goodbye, lovely to meet you, she gives me a hug. And I'm thinking, okay, I don't know you. I was okay with the hug mostly, but there was just a little bit of me was like, I'm not sure I know you really well enough to hug you. She was a hugger. Okay. We had coffee on Friday. She hugged me when we met. She hugged me when we left it parted. And I'm a hugger when I know someone well. But she could have made a big mistake if I was not a hugger. But that's who she is. And then I know there are other people in my circle I'm really close with. They're not huggers, right? So you need to pick up on those signals, and it comes to paying attention so that you are responding appropriately, as opposed to reacting in a way that could be inappropriate. So that was my last slide. We will have a few minutes for discussion. Just want to reminder, Pete already dropped a nugget of this. In March, Pete is going to be talking about expectations in the mind, how your expectations can play games with you, basically, whether you have high expectations or low expectations, and the resultant level of satisfaction you feel, whether or not your expectations are met. So you need to pay attention to that. And then I'll be talking about motivation at work, because your expectations and what motivates you are linked. And so helping you understand what motivates you and how to leverage your motivation to drive your behaviors and your success. And that's it. So